Hello ladies and gentlemen and welcome to the Film Brits podcast. I'm your host Trilbee, the knights who say knee of film criticism, and I apologise if I'm sounding tired, if I'm sounding quiet, or if I just generally ramble and lose my train of thought in this podcast. I have been away for a couple of weeks. I've been working, and I was also in Canada for a week for my Uncle Brian's funeral, which is why there's been no podcast for the past 2 weeks, and I'm currently recording this from a hotel room as I'm away for work. I'm away, I won't say where or who with, because there's creepy people out there who like to use their information against me, so once the job's done, I'll open up and let you folks know where I've been and what I've been doing, but I kind of make it a personal policy to not say what I'm doing or where I am while I'm currently doing the job, because that's stuff that has happened in the past, and I'm not a big fan of that happening, because I have some rather obsessive fans out there. But anyway, without further ado, let's just proceed with the podcast, and let's open with the Share the Love segment. And the Share the Love segment is when I try and throw out some positivity and some attention onto people who I think deserve it, because the internet and the world in general can be a pretty terrible, depressing place, and I'll admit a few days ago I was feeling incredibly down and depressed a little bit after just reading the news and the whole Santa Fe shooting in Texas, and I know that sounds like being sad on other people's behalf, and it may sound a bit silly, but it was kind of also generally a really tough day, because I'd also been logging, I'd been doing transcripts for the day at work, I'd been listening to hospital interviews for a upcoming documentary, and just listening to these interviews from doctors and nurses and people in resuscitation departments in NHS hospitals in the UK, and having to transcribe everything they say. Some pretty depressing stories, and then when I come home I hear the news about Santa Fe, and it was not a fun day at all. So I like to try and share some positivity in this segment, and today, while I was travelling to my place of work, I was going through Manchester city centre, and there was the Manchester Marathon, or there was charity races. There was people in wheelchairs as they were doing, I forget the name of the exact sport, it's when they're in wheelchairs with the protruding front wheel and the two back wheels, and they're racing, and there were people doing a marathon. And I was also checking out my Instagram and Facebook feed, and a lot of people I know, a lot of friends, were doing runs and races for life for charity all across the country. And then I come to the place where I'm currently working at, where I'm staying at the hotel, and on my way to the hotel I see even more races and triathlons and wheelchair races and marathons, and I would like to share my love right now to all of those people, whether or not they support family members or they support charities, and also people who donate to their causes, who donate to see them run 5 kilometres or 10 kilometres or whatever distance they're running or riding. I would like to share my love to all of those people who are donating and working for incredible causes in their own way, whatever personally touches them or personally affects their life. I can only speak personally, but for my Uncle Brian, whose funeral I went to the other week, he passed away. He died of cancer, and of course, as we all know, fuck cancer. But it just gets you kind of thinking about your own mortality in a way, and how the type of people we try and support and the causes we try and fight for. And this is getting awfully heavy for the first 3 or 4 minutes of what is meant to be a film or media related podcast, but we'll get to some more fun stuff later. But I just wanted to share my love to all of those people, and if you know someone who has run a marathon or has done something of an equivalent recently or is going to do one in the near future, then I encourage you just to share a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars, just send it their way to help support that cause, or at the bare minimum, share their links where they are doing donation pages. Just do whatever you can to support those people, because they are running for their own personal reasons, or because they want to try and do something better in the world, and I think that's outstanding. I can barely run up the stairs of my hotel room without getting out of breath. It's something I'm actually wanting to try and fix this summer, depending on how much free time I get. But those people are absolute fucking heroes, and my heart goes out to all of them. So let's get to the fun segment of the podcast, and that is the feature presentation. And while I was on the plane to Canada, it was an 8-hour trip there and a 6.5-hour trip back. The 6.5-hour one was an overnight one, so I'm presuming the skies were clearer, which might have been why the trip was shorter, but either way, during the flight, it was there were in-flight movies. and I decided, okay, I'm going to watch some of these films that I have never seen before. And on the flight, I watched 6 movies, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about each one I saw. I'm not going to go into any sort of spoilers, and if I do, I'll have like a 30-40 second spoiler tag. I'll try and give you folks a heads up if possible. But I saw 6 movies on the plane. 5 of them I'd never seen before, and 1 of them I had, and I'll explain my reasons for watching it when I get to it. But let's start off with the Steven Spielberg movie The Post, which came out a couple of months ago in the UK and has made its way to certain airlines. So The Post is, of course, directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Liz Hannah and Josh Singer and stars Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. And the film follows the true story of the Washington Post publishing the Pentagon Papers in the early 1970s. And what happened is that during the 30-year involvement of the United States in the Vietnam War, the US government were fully aware that the war was not going anywhere, that it was a futile effort. However, they wanted to keep up morality. They wanted to appear to be on the winning side. They wanted to avoid embarrassment, basically. So what they did was that they would tell the press and they would tell people that the war's going great, we're making great progress, we're advancing, all the while soldiers were being killed in Vietnam, and the US government were complicit in the knowledge that they were dying for a cause that they knew they could not win and that they should not be there, and that the war is a lost cause. So what happened is that one individual who was in Vietnam, he was effectively a whistleblower, and he went to the New York Times and he tried to and he got access to all of these confidential United States documents, and he went to the New York Times and also the Washington Post to try and get this information out there, that the American government knew that the war was a futile effort, yet they were fighting in it anyway. And the movie more or less follows. The main character, in a way, is Meryl Streep, who plays Katharine Graham, who is the head of the Washington Post, and it is a family business. It's a family newspaper. It was inherited down to her from her father-in-law, and then when her husband died, she inherited the business in a sense. And it's a relatively small up-and-coming newspaper, and this could be a make-or-break opportunity, because once they realise that they have these confidential United States documents, they could go to prison for treason if they're not able to adequately defend themselves for publishing what is confidential information that could put soldiers' lives at risk. So it's a really interesting political, social thriller in a sense. It works really well as a drama because you have Meryl Streep who has this real personal investment, and if she does not, it's not just about fighting for what she believes is right. She has a business to run. She has people's livelihoods in her hands. She's got the staff of the Washington Post who could possibly either go to prison or lose their jobs if this backfires. So she has to think about herself, her legacy, and also the company that she's putting at risk by publishing these papers. However, it's got to be said that Tom Hanks has the more showy, more fun role as Ben Bradlee, who is the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post. And I love Tom Hanks. The guy is an absolute treasure. He is a terrific actor, and he is having a lot of fun here. Ben Bradlee is a great presence on screen. He's really fun to watch. He's a big, bombastic personality. I imagine you kind of have to be if you want to be the editor of a newspaper in the 1970s. There's some great dialogue. The film is obviously really topical, drawing comparisons with the current Trump administration to the Nixon administration in the 1970s, drawing very explicit parallels between the two and the whole freedom of the press and the corruption of the government. This is a very topical film, and you can see why Steven Spielberg rushed this film into production so it could get out in time for the just gone Oscar season, and while he was simultaneously doing post-production on Ready Player One. And The Post is, in a way, it feels like a rushed film structurally, and I don't mean that in that the film feels really, really quick. It feels like Steven Spielberg got his hands on this really interesting script, which was written by, let me get the names, Liz Hannah and Josh Singer, and then thought, okay, what we'll do, we'll get this film straight into production right now. And if I was a producer, I would have said, Steven, do you want to, look at the script first and maybe give it a quick once-over and a slight redraft and maybe trim it a little bit? And he said, no, we've got to get this film done. And as a result, the film seems to be a little bit baggy. There's a bit of fat that probably should have been trimmed in the script, or maybe even in the editing department, in the editing suite. And the The Post takes a while to get going. The film, strictly speaking, isn't that long. It's less than 2 hours long, but it feels quite a bit longer. And the film maybe feels like it could have picked up the pace a little bit more. The story is interesting, and the characters are engaging, and the topical themes really keep the audience invested, but it takes a while to get going. The second act is a little bit middling, and the film really picks up when the papers themselves get published, but they don't really get published until roughly the 70 to 80 minute mark. But that is absolutely the best scene in the movie, and one of the reasons it's the best scene in the movie is because John Williams does a fantastic score. I think in the soundtrack he's only got maybe 7 or 8 tracks in the actual score itself, but the track, The Press Is Rolling, I think it's track 2 either way. It's the music that plays when they decide to finally publish the papers, and it's done over a montage of the papers getting put through the printing press, and then they're sent out, and they're shipped out, and they're put on the back of vans, and then they're thrown onto the street and onto newsstands. The music's terrific, and it doesn't feel it feels like it's got that John Williams touch, but it doesn't feel like whimsy classical John Williams. It feels like it's suited for this particular source material. But The Post, it's a good film. I really recommend it. In my opinion, it would not have been a Best Picture nominee. It's kind of B-level Spielberg. But it's still a really good film. I think it's worth seeing. It's worth seeing at least once, and on repeat viewings, it's probably one of those films that you will end up hitting fast forward in a few key like in a few of the less important moments and the less important segments, for lack of a better term. But it's an interesting topical story. If you are interested at all in the current political climate, I do recommend watching The Post, and in a way, it's almost worth seeing just to see what Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks do with their performances, because they're really a lot of fun to watch. So I recommend The Post, even if that recommendation is not necessarily a glowing one. I think it will do well in classrooms, in history classes in colleges and stuff like that, and it's a good way to get across this story in a cinematic way. I just think that the material maybe could have been tightened up a little bit in the edit or in another draft of the screenplay, in my opinion. Dialogue's fine, it's all in that structure though. Next up, we have a film that I missed when it came out in theatres, and I was really wanting to watch it after the initial reviews came in. It was a film I was quite sceptical about, but after seeing it, it was a lot of fun. I'm talking about Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, which is of course a sequel to the 1995 movie Jumanji starring Robin Williams, which is a film I watched as a kid. It was a film that scared the living daylights out of me. The spiders, the quicksand, the animals, it really did freak me out as a kid when I first saw it. I think I saw it when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and it's a scary film when you're that age. It really freaked me out. I've not revisited it for a long time. I've seen a couple of clips and stuff, and I know that the CGI does not quite hold up, but at the time it was quite a technical marvel, and I kind of enjoyed it when I was a kid. I need to revisit it, but this is a really fun film. So the plot, of course, follows a bunch of high school students. You've got Spencer, you've got Bethany, you've got Anthony, and you've got Martha. And for one reason or another, they get in trouble. They're kind of breakfast clubbed in a way, and they have to clean out a school basement. And while they're there, they discover a video game console, because the Jumanji game, the board game from the 1995 film, it washed up on the shores. It was a board game, and then whoever picked it up thought, "Oh, who plays board games anymore?" And then he starts playing a video game, and then the board game overnight it changes into a video game console, and then is able to suck up another kid. But what happens? This film takes place several years after it has become a video game console, and these 4 teenagers decide, "Oh, during detention, we'll just give it a play while we're not being supervised by a teacher," and they get sucked into the game. Spencer becomes Dwayne Johnson, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Bethany becomes Jack Black, an overweight middle-aged man. Anthony becomes Kevin Hart, about 3 foot shorter, and Martha becomes this badass Karen Gillan, Lara Croft style commando lady. And the film gets an awful lot of mileage out of these 4 teenagers being physically very mismatched with their video game avatars. You've got this nerdy kid who becomes basically the biggest man on the planet. You've got this Instagram obsessed girl who would probably call herself an Instagram model. She becomes Jack Black. You've got this sports guy who turns into Kevin Hart, who's a zoologist who is basically a glorified backpack for The Rock, and one of his weaknesses is cake. And you've got this shy really cynical girl who transforms into Lara Croft, basically. And Karen Gillan does a really good job at playing that sort of badass woman. And I remember there was the early criticisms about what Karen Gillan was wearing, and while the film doesn't exactly justify it incredibly well, it's the whole, why would I be wearing this outfit when I'm in a jungle? It is sort of what it's lampshading it, but it's still doing the thing. I think if they really wanted to kind of mock that, they'd Martha would do as the Avatar would maybe take someone's coat and wear it for the rest of the film, so she wasn't dressed up like that. But this is, of course, nitpicking. It's because something that I remembered when watching the film. But it wouldn't surprise me if the four main stars, The Rock, Jack Black, Kevin Hart, Karen Gillan, they watched the teenagers act out their scenes, and maybe they watched them act out the scenes in the jungle during the video game, like on a soundstage or something, and then tried to imitate it, because they get the mannerisms really, really down pat. You've got Jack Black, who kind of steals the show as a teenage girl, and some of the funniest moments of the film come from Jack Black trying to, like, just him learning to be a dude, like, learning how to pee, trying to teach Karen Gillan how to be like a smouldering woman to seduce some guards, and it's some really, really funny segments and really funny stuff. And Dwayne Johnson is really convincing as this teenager in this bodybuilder's body, and the awkwardness that comes with that, and this potential romance between him and Karen Gillan's character, and how they just have no idea how to act around the opposite gender. It's really well done, really well played, and the comedy really excels. And while the director, Jake Kasdan, he's directed some like okay comedies, like Bad Teacher was alright, although he directed Sex Tape, so let's not talk about Sex Tape. He does a good job with the cast here, and I think the cast are really carrying the film, because the action in a way kind of lets the side down. The action's not really all that interesting. It's the fight scenes and the chases don't really engage all that much, and that kind of makes sense. There's nothing in Jake Kasdan's filmography that even indicates any sort of propensity for action sequences, but it's still the location filming is pretty good, and I appreciated some of the video game references, how there's one AI character who helps them out on their journey, and he essentially has predetermined phrases, so he repeats all the phrases to these characters, because he's an AI who's only programmed to say certain things. The film gets actually quite a bit of mileage out of that, and it's really fun. But really, what sells Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle is the interplay with the four main characters, although I will say that Kevin Hart kind of does let the side down, because while all these other characters are really while the other actors are really going above and beyond to play against type, Kevin Hart does kind of just go, he falls back on his own shtick, the whole shrieking short black man. It's the same thing we've seen over and over again in Kevin Hart films, and yeah, he gets a couple of funny jokes and funny lines, and he has a few funny moments, because he's Kevin Hart, he's been doing this for a while, and he's a really funny guy. It just feels weird that you have all of these other actors who are really putting their all into playing these different characters, and Kevin Hart is just business as usual. I think he kind of lets the side down. But still, the video game references are fun. There's some legitimately funny gags and jokes. The CGI is pretty good for the most part. And I felt like the film actually had quite a bit of heart to it. It's a story about like learning to overcome your own weaknesses and being brave. And while it's it's not Shakespeare, but it's still good, like children's family movie fare that I enjoyed and appreciated. There's nothing quite as horrific and scary as the original Jumanji film from my recollection, but it's still a fun time, and it probably even improves on the original Jumanji film. And I'd pay to see another. I'd go to the theatres and watch a sequel, as long as these cast of characters returned and their avatars were maybe expanded upon the concept a bit more, but I'd still pay to see another Dwayne Johnson, Jack Black and Karen Gillan and maybe Kevin Hart collaboration. Now, this film is a really, really random one that I watched, and that was Ferdinand, which is the animated movie from Blue Sky Studios, who of course did the Ice Age movies. And the story of Ferdinand is based off of the book, The Story of Ferdinand, about the gentle bull, the bull who would rather sniff flowers and smell flowers in the countryside than participate in bullfights. And Ferdinand is a film that kind of takes that short story, that short book from the 1920s, 30s, from like nearly a century ago, and expand it into a feature-length film. And Ferdinand is a good film that could and should have been great. In the hands of Pixar, this story could have been really profound. and I liked all of the films that I saw during my in-flight experience. Spoiler alert, I liked all of them. But Ferdinand is the film that I was most disappointed by, because it had an opportunity in its hands and it just lost it. Because Ferdinand, the story is solid. The actual nuts and bolts of the plot are fine. You have this bull who is voiced by John Cena, who does a really good job, and he's this gentle bull. Like when he's a baby, when he's a calf, he's bullied by all the other bulls who want to grow up and become really strong bullfighters and be chosen by the matador and go into a bullfight for glory and for fame. But Ferdinand would rather sniff flowers and appreciate nature, and he manages to escape one day. And he grows up on a farm, he finds a family, but there's a misunderstanding. He's a big bull, he scares a lot of people, so he gets sent back to that place. He gets sent back to the bull, I don't know what you'd call it, like the training bull ranch. And he finds all the people who were there at his childhood who have grown up to try and be like really tough bulls, but he's a naturally big, really strong bull. He just does not have this urge to fight. And this matador comes along who says, I'm the best bullfighter in the world, I have one final bullfight, and I want to choose the biggest and the best bull, and he determines that is Ferdinand. And you have these really great plot digressions where one of the bulls who makes a poor showing demonstrating to the matador when he's trying to select which bull is which, goes to the chop house. I think they call it the chop house, which is basically the butchers. If they don't go to the ring, they get made into meat. And if they go into the ring, they are killed by the matador because no one wins against the matador. And it's this idea of you either stand your ground and die, or you stand your ground and you also die. And Ferdinand has to make choices over the course of the film that, considering the source material and that this is an animated kids film, are really mature, really profound, and could have been incredible material. The issue here is that the film has to dumb itself down for lowest common denominator values. You have these three horses that are like dancing horses, and they have like a dance-off against the bulls. You've got these three hedgehogs and porcupines who are into hip-hop, and they do singing and they do dancing. You've got Kate McKinnon, who plays this goat, who actually gets some pretty dramatic moments, but she's mainly there for comic relief and slapstick. And you get this sense that the film had this great source material, but it either didn't have faith in its audience, or there were producers who were saying, this material's not going to sell, you need to have slapstick, you need to have pop culture references, you need to have singing and dance numbers, and it kind of collapses under its own inadequacy, at least its own sense of inadequacy, because the story's enough. The characters are rather broadly drawn, but there's still potential there. And the final scene, if I were to just describe the plot to you, getting rid of all of the fluff, all of the filler, all of the pop culture references and the dance-offs and the jokes and the action sequences and the chases involving vehicles and through the city and like all of that superlative stuff that really detracts from the whole package, you would think this was a Pixar-like type story where they found this really powerful moral about bullying or being yourself and standing up for your ideals and finding another way. But when you actually watch Ferdinand, it drops the ball because it doesn't have faith in that story. And if Pixar had done this instead of Blue Sky Studios or a company like Illumination did not do this material, you could have a really powerful movie. And John Cena really embodies this bull. He's empathetic. He gives pathos and humanity to this character. And you really grow to like Ferdinand over the course of the movie. But what happens is that the film kind of cops out on some of its own ideals. It goes back on the chop house aspect of the film, and it actually creates a couple of plot holes in doing so. There's extensive action and chase sequences. There's modern musical montages. This could have been a terrific timeless animated film. As it just stands right now, it's merely a good one with sequences that made me quite frankly embarrassed to be watching it in public on an airplane. It could have been good, it should have been great. But yeah, Ferdinand was... I can't tell kids to not see it, so there's nothing really reprehensible in there, but it really should have been better, and I'm really disappointed in a way. So the next movie I'm going to be talking about is Molly's Game, which is the directorial debut of screenwriter Aaron Sorkin, who of course did The Social Network, who did Wings, who did Steve Jobs and Moneyball and so many. Not Wings. What am I on about? The West Wing. I'm tired in a hotel, I apologise. And this is his directorial debut. It tells the story of Molly Bloom, it essentially tells her life story. She's played by Jessica Chastain, who after crashing out during the 2002 Winter Olympics, she was a skier. She decides to abandon going to law school, which was her original plan. She takes a gap year. She goes to LA and she becomes a waitress, and then she meets a real estate developer. She helps manage his office, and then she's given a responsibility to run something called The Game, which is where some powerful individuals in LA and in Hollywood come together to play poker in this bar. And over the course of the film, she develops the game into a much more prestigious event. She rents out a hotel room, she gets more high-profile players, she gets a lot more money, and she starts... the whole operation is legal until she starts taking in some of the winnings, and then it becomes an illegal crap game. And the film follows her life story about how she is arrested by the FBI because some of the people that she was taking part in the game with were associated with the Russian mafia and the Italian mafia, and she has to prove her innocence, and she hires a lawyer played by Idris Elba, who is really great in the film. Molly's Game is good. It feels like Aaron Sorkin as a director has yet to establish some sort of unique style. I think he really liked The Wolf of Wall Street a lot, and he's trying to implement that, particularly with a lot of the narration and the way that Jessica Chastain's character develops over the course of the film. But as a writer, you cannot deny his ability to create great dialogue and relatable dialogue, although with the case of Molly's Game, more than almost anything I think Aaron Sorkin has written in recent memory, it feels like Aaron Sorkin really wants the audience to know how smart and well-read he is. There's a lot of references to literature, there's a lot of references to theatre and movies, and almost every scene starts with so-and-so famous person once said, and then they say something that's relevant to the situation. And as opposed to it feeling like a profound influence or like adding extra meaning and anything like that to the actual scene itself, it feels like Aaron Sorkin is basically saying, look how much I've read, aren't you impressed? And in a way it kind of gets grating, especially since the film is 2.5 hours long, although to be fair, I didn't feel its length. Molly's Game felt shorter than The Papers, even though it was about 40 to 50 minutes longer than The Papers, which is quite surprising. So, oh no, not 40, my math is wrong. It's about 20 to 30 minutes longer than The Papers. My math is wrong here. So The Papers felt longer even though it was half an hour shorter, roughly. But it's still a interesting story. The film does a good job at explaining the intricacies of the game, and when there's something important about to happen relating to the poker game and how it relates to some of the characters, the film does a good job at laying out the stakes, laying out what is happening on that poker table in rather unique and clever ways, which I, as an audience member who does not really play many card games, it was something that I did appreciate. The cast is okay, although it feels like with the exception of Jessica Chastain and Idris Elba, the actors were basically just told to do whatever they wanted and they weren't really given much direction. There's quite a few actors who kind of come across as blank slates as opposed to actual characters. They become more vessels for Aaron Sorkin's dialogue, whereas Jessica Chastain and Idris Elba, who get predominantly most of the screen time, actually get to embody real characters and personalities, and it feels like Aaron Sorkin gave them a lot of attention on set as opposed to the rest of the cast, which is especially true for, let's say, Kevin Costner, who plays Molly Bloom's dad. And one thing I kind of took umbrage with over the course of the film is that Jessica Chastain as Molly Bloom is portrayed as this really powerful female figure, how she kind of grew up with a hatred of men and she likes having power over men in some sort of subliminal way. And then all of a sudden, Kevin Costner, who plays Molly Bloom's father, who is also a psychiatrist, basically just comes out of nowhere and mansplains the plot to her, who mansplains her motivations and her character growth and her character arc, and it just felt really out of place, and once again, another excuse for Aaron Sorkin to spout dialogue and spout how clever he is, as opposed to really portraying and depicting characters on screen. I would like to see what Aaron Sorkin does next. I would like to see maybe even read the book, which is the true story. The memoir is called Molly's Game, the true story of the 26-year-old woman behind the most exclusive, high-stakes underground poker game in the world, which is a very long title, but it's maybe a book I wouldn't mind reading. I would like to see what Aaron Sorkin does next. I hope he does get behind the camera at some point in the near future. I would just like to see him maybe grow as a director over the course of the next few years. But this is still an impressive debut. The performances are really great. The dialogue, despite it trying to impress the audience way too much, is still really charming. One of my favourite moments is early on in the film. They mention the play The Crucible, and Molly's like, I've not read it, and Idris Elba's like, it's considered one of the best plays of the 20th century. And then near the end of the film, Molly quotes The Crucible, and then Idris Elba just looks at her and says, you finally read The Crucible? She's like, yeah, I did. It's really great, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. Like, that's just a really fun human moment, and just a really great bit of dialogue. I just wish that the film maybe had a bit more to it, and it had more attention to detail for its supporting cast. And just the general emotions of the characters. But I still liked Molly's Game. It was a good time. And the last film that I'd never seen before my flight was Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. This film got like the smallest possible release in the UK, so I was really surprised to see it on my film selection. It's directed and written by Angela Robinson, and it tells the true story of the creation of the Wonder Woman comic book character, who, of course, I'd heard. Why do I keep saying "of course"? Like, I've clocked this during this podcast. In my introductory paragraph and sentence of every review I've done, I've said "of course." I apologise, folks. I'm tired. So it follows the true story of the creation of Wonder Woman by the psychologist William Moulton Marston, who was a university professor who also, along with his wife, invented the lie detector. You've got William Marston and his wife Elizabeth Marston, and what happens is that they are teaching at this university, and they bring in Olive Byrne, played by Bella Heathcote, to help them out, behind the scenes, to help them out with their research. And what happens is that the three start to develop a romantic, polyamorous, consensual relationship with each other. And it's all about the prejudices of the 1940s and the 1950s with what is, even by today's standards in a way, kind of depicting an unconventional love story. Because as depressing as this is, you do often see the word polyamory appear in the same sentences like bestiality or paedophilia, which is absolutely depressing because there's nothing wrong with consensual adults having multiple consensual partners, as long as it is, of course, consensual. But you've got Luke Evans as William Marston, you've got Rebecca Hall as Elizabeth Marston, and Bella Heathcote as Olive Byrne. And the film chronicles their relationship over the course of about 15 to 20 years, and they have children together. They live with each other, but they've got to maintain a lie. They essentially have a secret identity for themselves, and they talk. And it's about them putting their political ideals and their political beliefs into the Wonder Woman comic, and how that draws the ire of the Child Study Association of America. The film is framed and formatted with William Marston giving a testimony to the Child Study Association of America, because they think, oh, Wonder Woman, it's all about bondage and lesbianism and these indecent things, and we want to ban it. And this is really, really topical, but about how you have this media with LGBT subject matter and women in prominence and in prominent, powerful positions, and you have this sort of niche who are really trying to slam it down and get rid of it. Which, once again, very much like the Post is kind of a. It feels like this is a very relevant movie and a very relevant story to tell right now, and what happens over the course of the film is this really engaging and interesting relationship, and the personal and professional consequences that come from what is essentially, when you think about it, kind of a really natural relationship that everyone, the three are really happy with, and it's what they want to do, but society kind of shuns them and shuts them down. So they think, okay, what we'll do is that we'll make a comic book. We'll use these inspirations from Greek mythology with Wonder Woman, and we will include bondage. We will include all these subliminal themes as propaganda. And I don't necessarily mean the word propaganda in a derogatory sense. William Marston in this film actually uses the word propaganda in terms of getting across his own ideology within the pages of the Wonder Woman comic book. And there's some terrific sequences. Like the poster of the film has Bella Heathcote in this corset and with and she's holding the rope, and the text says "Ever Wonder," and she's got the tiara on. And that scene itself is so beautifully filmed, and it's so respectfully restrained as well. And it's all about the power that like comes from a sub and dom relationship. And there's also full-on sex scenes in this film, which was interesting because I was on a plane watching this, and there were people around me, and a really annoying person in the seat in front of me who leaned way back, and even though she was like 5 foot tall, and there was no need for her to do that, and she was very rude. But anyway, just watching this film, and there's like full-on sex scenes, and oh blimey. But the scene that is the poster, which is when they kind of like get the visual representation and the inspiration for Diana Prince and Wonder Woman, is a beautiful sequence. It's really incredibly well performed by Rebecca Hall and Bella Heathcote too. The entire cast is superb. Like the main three, the trio, are absolutely outstanding in this film. They give great performances. And yeah, it's a really great personal story about desire, about what it means to have real control over another person in a relationship, in both a platonic and in a sexual way. It's a really great character study about relationships and romance and love and prejudice. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. It was a really smart piece of like drama and romance, and it's probably not for everyone because of course it does like deal with polyamory and BDSM and stuff like that. So if you are like more like liberal in terms of what you think people should be able to do, or what they do in the confines of their bedroom and in their sex life or whatever, then if you are more prudish to that or more opposed to that, then you might not enjoy Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. But for everyone else, and also people who are kind of interested in how real life inspirations that kind of define and create the inspiration for some of the most iconic fictional characters of all time, like Wonder Woman, Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman is a fascinating film. And I think it also says a lot about, like, I know people like to say, keep your politics out of my films, and I just like want entertainment, but that entertainment, it has to come from somewhere. It has to come from real life inspirations, from real life messages, from like true life experiences, and what the author, or in this case for Wonder Woman, the authors, they go through in their own day-to-day life, and what their reality and what their normal is. This stuff comes from somewhere, and Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman depicts that really well, and I really do highly recommend it. And the final film that I saw is Paddington 2. I had already seen Paddington 2. I saw it in theatres. I really liked it. I think it's about on par as, just as good as the first film. Maybe not as good, because Paddington 2 in many ways is identical to the first film in terms of its structure, and even like the motivation and like the twist concerning the villain. But I really enjoyed it, and the reason I watched Paddington 2 instead of like a new film, there were quite a few new films that I still hadn't seen on the flight, like All the Money in the World and a few other films. I watched this one because on the flight I really wanted to sleep, and I thought, okay, I sleep better with background noise, I sleep better listening to something, whether it's music or a podcast or a YouTube video or something. So I'll put Paddington 2 on, a film that I've already seen, that I don't mind not watching, and just fall asleep to it. I watched all of Paddington 2 again, because I just enjoyed it that friggin' much. And what really stood out to me on a second viewing was just how funny Hugh Bonneville is. Because he's essentially the straight man in these films. Like, he's surrounded by this eccentric family and this eccentric bear. And he seems to be the only person he views himself as the only one in this family speaking sense. And he's so funny in this film. When they break into Hugh Grant's house, and Hugh Grant's like, "What are you doing in my house?" And Hugh Bonneville is there in his dressing gown. He emerges from behind the sofa, and he just pauses for a moment, and then says, "I could ask you the same question." That line really hit me hard. That was so funny. His delivery is impeccable, and he's great in dramatic TV roles, but he also excels in comedy. He's really great. And of course, Brendan Gleeson, the way he says "marmalade," and his whole character Knuckles, that's really funny. I'm not going to elaborate too much on Paddington 2 because I've already seen it, and most people, I would rather talk about films that I've never watched for the first time. But Paddington 2 was really fun, really sweet and endearing. And there's a thing, I might have to Google it, but I listened to I listened to Kermode and Mayo film reviews on like BBC Radio 5, and there was altitude adjusted lachrymosity syndrome, AALS. And basically due to science or the air pressure or whatever, when you're in a plane watching a film, you are more susceptible to the emotions, meaning you are more likely to cry while watching a movie on a plane than you are watching it on ground level. And while I didn't cry at Paddington 2, the ending did cause me to well up, even though I already knew what happened. I'd already seen the film before, but that ending is so beautiful and so sweet, and I really want to see a Paddington 3. I believe the film made quite a bit of money, so I really hope that we get a third one and that Paul King returns to director, because he really does seem to have the magic touch here. So yeah, Paddington 2, really good, really enjoyed it. Okay folks, it is now time for the lightning round, where I go to Facebook and ask for questions and I answer them in 60 seconds or less. So without further ado, 3, 2, 1, go! Dean Jones asks, most anticipated movie for the rest of the year. I'm really looking forward to Mission Impossible Fallout. I'm not hyped for Mission Impossible Fallout, although that last trailer was really, really good. Really good trailer. I am looking forward to it. But I would say it's probably The Incredibles 2. Or something else. Yeah, probably Incredibles 2. I'm really looking forward to that, because Pixar, I think the material is great, and there's a lot to be said about superhero movies, and I like the fact that Elastigirl is getting a more prominent role. The idea of the movie being like a story about Mr. Incredible trying to become a parent, trying to become a good dad at home. I think there's boundless possibilities for comedy there. I'm really looking forward to... Yeah, I'd say it's Incredibles 2. Although, of course, there's going to be loads of like Oscar-related films towards the end of the year. That should be good. There's that Melissa McCarthy, Could You Ever Forgive Me, which looks really good as well. So I'm going to go for Incredibles 2 and Could You Ever Forgive Me. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. John Bridgewater asks, blood type. I'm blood type O. I am the boring common type, but I know that because I donate blood. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Nathan Snyder asks, thoughts on the current season of My Hero Academia. Season 3 is the first season I've had to watch week to week when it comes out, as opposed to Series 1 and 2, which were already out when I started watching, and I was able to binge watch them. And as a result, I think Series 3 has a much slower pace. In terms of just the pacing and the story content, 3 is not as good as 1 and 2 in my opinion. I'm still really enjoying it. I'm still really anticipating it, watching it every Sunday. But in terms of the actual content, because every episode of Series 1 and 2 feels like you could watch one episode, and even though it's part of a bigger, grander story, each episode feels really, really fulfilling. I'd say every 3 or 4 episodes of this current series feel really fulfilling. It's something I probably would much prefer to binge as opposed to watch week to week. Whereas there's only really been one truly great, satisfying episode, and that was episode 4. That was Midoriya versus Muscular, which just has the outstanding ending. But the rest of it, I feel like I would much rather be binging it, but I'm still enjoying it. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Paul Stannis asks, favourite hero versus villain one-on-one fight in the MCU? Okay, because you said hero versus villain one-on-one fights, that basically discounts almost everything in Civil War, so no airport fights, no Tony versus Steve. Okay, one-on-one, I think the Hulk versus Abomination is really underrated. That's a really great fight. The music's outstanding. I like the CGI in it. The choreography is really good, and how the Hulk rips apart a taxi and uses it as boxing gloves like in the Hulk Ultimate Destruction video game. But in terms of other MCU one-on-one fights, Ant-Man versus Yellow Jacket in his daughter's room is really fun, especially with Thomas the Tank Engine. One-on-one fights, so yeah, nothing from Infinity War either, because those are all basically group fights. Also, I don't know if it counts, but the Doctor Strange fight in the main Sanctum Sanctorum, when he's kind of learning his powers and he gets the Cloak of Levitation for the first time, that's really good. But I think one-on-one fight, probably Hulk versus Abomination. Okay, next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Dominic Miller says, can you recommend any non-TV Doctor Who stories? Non-TV? I enjoyed Dreamland, which was like the CG animated one where the Doctor goes to Area 51. It's a David Tennant story, and it's meant to take place between End of Time. No, it's meant to take place between the next Doctor and the End of Time Part 1. It's sort of like during that time when he's travelling on his own and he's going to regenerate soon. It's sort of in that sort of grey area. I thought that was pretty fun. You can get it on DVD for like £2 or £3, or you can probably watch it free online somewhere. Not that I condone that. Also, non-TV Doctor Who stories. There's the Five-ish Doctors reboot, which probably doesn't count, but that's really fun as well. As for Big Finish, I'm kind of trying to make my way through the first few stories, and of course, Spare Parts and Jubilee, that's sort of the great very first go-to ones for Big Finish. So hopefully I've given you a bit of a starting point. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Ben Frost asks, have you ever seen Luther, and if so, what did you think? I absolutely love the series, and it's written by the same guy who did The Rings of Akhaten. Yeah, Neil Cross, he is the showrunner for Luther. I think I've watched the whole of Series 1, but I don't really remember much of it, but it was years ago, and I think it was mostly background noise while I did other things. I would like to watch it. I love Idris Elba in almost anything he does, so it's something that I'm going to try and revisit at some point. I'd also like Neil Cross to come back and write for Doctor Who again, but yeah, I have watched Series 1, but it's something I really wasn't giving my full attention and will need to revisit. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Richard McGee says, what are your thoughts and memories of 2001 A Space Odyssey now that it has celebrated its 50th anniversary this year? I hate to be that hipster guy, I think it's overrated. Technically, it's outstanding. The cinematography and the practical effects and everything, it's outstanding, terrific, ahead of its time. HAL 9000 is an outstanding character and villain. The rest of the film I can take or leave. It's way too slow-paced for its own good. There's a difference between methodical and outright glacial, and 2001 A Space Odyssey, in my opinion, is really, really glacial. There is very little in terms of actual meaning or subtext or anything, in my opinion, outside of the HAL 9000 character. So, you kind of... I forget how long the film is. It feels like an eternity, but it feels like you are really investing in a lot of time for very little gratification in terms of themes or subtext or anything in terms of character outside of HAL 9000. So it's okay. It's not for me. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. David Anthony Gilmer asks, favourite legendary Pokemon? I want to say Entei, but that could be because of my bias of loving Pokemon, like the third Pokemon movie. In terms of favourite... Okay, I have a memory of catching Lugia. I had a Game Boy with Pokemon Silver, and I was flying somewhere. I can't remember where I was flying. Going on a family holiday. And I was in an airport, and we were waiting to board our flight, and I was on my Game Boy, and I was trying to catch Lugia. I didn't want to use my Master Ball, I wanted to save that for later, and I was throwing Great Ball after Great Ball, trying to whittle it down and paralyze it and all this stuff. And I remember catching Lugia in that room, in their waiting area, and shouting, yes! As loud as I could, and everyone just stops and stares at me, and I'm just like, hello, I caught Lugia. So either Lugia or Entei. So that's probably one of those two. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Alex Rooney asks, have you seen the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer? If so, what did you think of it? I liked the trailer. I couldn't really quote or name anything specific about it because I don't have it on hand and I haven't watched it since it first came out. But it looks good. I'm hoping the production comes through in the end because, of course, Bryan Singer he was kicked off the production after running a really, really bad set. And Dexter Fletcher, who directed Eddie the Eagle, is taking it over. So I think I've heard nothing but great things about him in the industry with people who have worked with him. Apparently he's really great and really kind. So I really wish him great success, and I hope the film does well. I hope that the film uses great use of the licensed soundtrack, so it's got some of the best music in history, so it better do. But yeah, I hope it comes out well, and I liked the trailer. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Tom Burley Smith asks, what are your hopes and fears for the upcoming Solo A Star Wars story? My hopes are we just get a fun, rollicking, good space opera. My fears are that Alden Ehrenreich will not be very good. He may be the weakest part of the film. And, of course, the inevitable backlash because, Last Jedi was terrible, and Han Solo was terrible, so there's and that discourse. Like, the whole discussion surrounding The Last Jedi was just terrible to be a part of. Like, I loved The Last Jedi, but just going around online and seeing people there are legitimate criticisms, which I also acknowledge and accept and will criticise the film for, but some of the discourse around that film was so dour and so stupid and so poorly thought out and so mean-spirited. I hope that doesn't happen again for Solo A Star Wars story. I really hope that the online discourse is actually, interesting and fun and good to engage with. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Harvey D. Cotton Jr. says, why does Hollywood still use the Wilhelm scream? Because it's kind of a tradition. It's weird. For those of you, for some reason, who don't know, the Wilhelm scream was a movie from... It was a a character in a like Western movie in the 50s called Wilhelm. He's shot by an arrow by a Native American, and he does a scream. And now, for some reason, that scream is used in many films. It's used in Deadpool 2 most recently. It's used in almost every Star Wars film. It's used in Indiana Jones. Basically anything with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, it's likely to be used. I think it was used in Ready Player One at some point. And it's oddly an iconic scream. Hollywood still like to use it because it's just a fun thing to use. It's also just a fun moment to, like, if you're an audience member, you'll be like, I know that scream, that's a funny scream. The scream itself is kind of a joke unto itself. It's a weird meta joke. So there's no one reason Hollywood likes to use the Wilhelm scream. It's just a weird tradition. A tradition that some people can either engage with or ignore. Either way, the film is no better or worse without it. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Jonathan Mullen asks, if you could renew one original Avengers MCU contract, who would it be? Probably Chris Evans. Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, and Chris Hemsworth is great as Thor. But there's something about the way Chris Evans has embodied Captain America, how he's even like on like outside of the films, just how he is in public and how he is online and how he is talking to people. He just seems like an absolute class act. So I would love to renew his contract, but in a way I'd feel bad because he clearly wants to maybe do his own things and direct his own projects. So I hope that he doesn't die, because Chris Evans as Captain America is terrific. But if he passed the mantle on to somebody else, that would also work. But with Tony Stark, I think if he were to die, then that would be a fitting end. But Captain America needs to live on. Like, have you seen America right now? We need Steve Rogers. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Edward Sweet asks, favourite classic monster movie, 1950s or before? There's a lot to choose from, but one of my... I don't know if it's my definitive favourite, but one of my favourites is The Mummy. The original Boris Karloff Mummy. That opening scene, like the opening 5 or 10 minutes where the archaeologists, they've just dug up the sarcophagus and it's just like stood up upright in the background, and they talk about their find, and one of them leaves the room and you just see in the background the cover come open. It's just terrific in terms of tension building. To this day it's still pretty creepy and scary. It holds up well, really well. Whereas a few other ones like Dracula and Frankenstein, they hold up well as well, but there's still quite a few dated elements. The Mummy does not feel quite as dated. It's creepy, it's scary, it's got quite a bit on its mind as well, and I really enjoy it. So it's probably not my favourite, like definitive, but in the confines of a 60-second answer, it's all I can think of right now. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Mitchell Radford asks, how would you open Avengers 4? Tough question. What I would do, ignoring everything that will happen afterwards and in the second and in the third act, or whatever direction the film wants to go back into, I would open by establishing who is still alive in this universe and having them just talk about it. Because, Black Panther's gone. Steve saw Bucky, disintegrate in front of him. Oh, spoiler warning, by the way. I'm sorry. Spoiler warning. But he saw half of the cast are decimated. You need to establish what the new normal is in the world and how the characters think about it, because we all love the action and the spectacle, but what is really bringing us back into the theatre day in, day out for the MCU is the characters and our attachment to them, and that needs to be front and centre, and also in the opening of Avengers 4. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Diego Lacamara says, what do you think of how Doug and Rob Walker are handling the Change the Channel controversy post our response? How do I think Doug and Rob Walker are handling the Change the Channel controversy? They're not handling it at all. They've kind of done what, in a business term, in a business way, is kind of the smart thing, and they've ignored it completely. They've not ignored, after their initial 2 responses, they've just not mentioned it. They've been creating new content daily on their YouTube channel. I'm not subscribed to their YouTube channel, by the way. After everything that came out, I was kind of growing out of it anyway, but that sort of sealed the deal for me. So they're just not doing anything about it, which in a way is smart, but it's not necessarily right. So I hope that they will apologise or get rid of Mike Mercado or whatever it takes to maybe in a few months' time try and rebuild the Channel Awesome brand, because that website is now just a ghost town. There's like 2 more contributors and the forums are down, so it's only their YouTube channel. Hopefully they can rebuild, but they've got to acknowledge it and apologise and make amends. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Marco Portuando says, did you see Happy Death Day? If you did, what are your thoughts, and what do you think of the sequel coming out in 2019? Yeah, when it came out on DVD, me and my partner watched it, and we both really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was a fun time. I didn't like how, in a way, it broke its own rules, because after a few times when the main character has died and comes back to life Groundhog Day style, she realises that she is carrying over some of the injuries of how she died last time, so she can't do this forever. It's a really smart way to give the film a ticking clock. But then afterwards the film just completely ignores that. That really annoyed me. But the film had, I liked the scene with the main girl and her father when they finally meet up. That was actually really touching. And I don't know if it needs a sequel, if the film stands on its own quite well. But I will see it if it looks good. But yeah, I did enjoy Happy Death Day. Next question. There's actually a question that I know I saw ahead of time. I'll give it longer than a minute because it's a really interesting question and I want to dedicate more time to it. So I'll get to that one last. So next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Connor James O'Donnell says, if Disney is successful in requiring Fox, then what Marvel property would you like to see them bring to the MCU first? X-Men or Fantastic Four? That would depend on how Dark Phoenix does. If Dark Phoenix is great and good and is a really good, solid, great send-off for the X-Men, if this deal does go through, then I'd like to see the Fantastic Four brought back. They could do it Spider-Man style, where they incorporate them into a bigger ensemble film, and then branch out into their own solo films, because that's what they did for Spider-Man, because he'd been in so many films in the past few years that it made sense to acclimatise audiences to this new version in a different film, and then set him off in his own little adventure. So that's probably the best for Fantastic Four, especially since we haven't got a good Fantastic Four movie yet. Whereas the X-Men with Deadpool and Logan, they are doing their own really cool thing. And I would rather see the Fantastic Four join the MCU than the X-Men. So if the X-Men can continue doing their own thing, but the Fantastic Four join the MCU, I'd be happy with that outcome personally. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Seb PT asks, would you like to see a version of the new Planet of the Apes films without the CGI? It's kind of hard to go back. If you look at the Tim Burton film, those masks and those costumes were good at the time, but don't stand up to the motion capture work done by Weta and Andy Serkis. I think that's the way to go, in my opinion. It was done incredibly well. The technology has really been improving over the past few years, and Andy Serkis really deserved some sort of accolade or some sort of acknowledgement for his performance as Caesar. And either they genuinely train the monkeys to act, or they continue with that approach. I think that's the way to go. I think the CGI, the technology is there. It's better and more emotive than doing it practically in a way for those type of characters. So I say I would like to see it done with CGI again. That, in my opinion. Okay, next question. Ooh, my voice is giving out. Give me a second. Let me just take a swig of hotel tea. Okay, nearly there. Next question, 3, 2, 1, go. Taylor Zoso Christiana says, what are your thoughts on the Channel Awesome / Jew Wario debacle? Yeah, so I've given my thoughts on the Channel Awesome thing. I think they need to make amends, they need to apologise. But for the Jew Wario thing, Justin Carmichael, otherwise known as Jew Wario, he committed suicide a few years ago, suffering from depression. He had a lot of personal demons, but then a lot came out. Channel Awesome, in one of their terrible responses, accidentally outed Jew Wario. In order to try and save their own skin and cover their own neck, they actually further incriminated themselves and one of the former contributors, Jew Wario, who sexually assaulted some contributors at a convention, and knew about it for quite a while before letting him go. So yeah, that whole thing kind of tarnishes Jew Wario's legacy and everything that those contributors did to support him and help him, and after all their well wishes after his suicide. It's a complex situation. I'm not invested in it, so I can't really speak on behalf of the people of Channel Awesome or its representatives or anything like that. It's just a shambles, really. That's the best way to describe it. And the final question, the one that I want to give a bit more minute to, so more than a minute to, so I'll turn off my timer. comes from Harry Walker, who asks, do you have any thoughts on representation of Asperger's syndrome / autism in TV and film? I'm currently writing an essay on it and would be interested to hear your thoughts. And one reason I'm giving more than a minute to this is because a few people have commented saying that they wanted to ask about the question, never have had the confidence to do so, that it's an important topic to cover. So I'm going to try and answer it in my own way. This is coming from someone who is not autistic, but who has worked with people on the autistic spectrum, who knows people who are autistic, and is also somebody who works in the media and hopes to be more creative in the media in the near future. So that's the perspective this is coming from. This is not coming from a specialist or someone with deep personal experience or deep personal ties to the subject matter. So this is how I interpret it, but it may vary for many other people. In terms of representing people on the spectrum in TV and film, it's kind of tough because if you have to kind of outright say in some forms of medium that they do have Asperger's syndrome or they are autistic. Otherwise, if you just lay it out there, if you don't say anything, and I'm going to ramble because this is the midnight ramblings of someone who is very tired because he's been working all day in his hotel room, so I apologise if I say stupid things. But if you don't portray it correctly, if you don't portray it sensitively enough, then you could just be, the audiences may misinterpret the character as just being a really insensitive character who they do not like, as opposed to somebody who is maybe trying to be social, or somebody who really is unable to read social situations. So it's a tough line to walk, because it's not just about depicting a character on TV or film or in comics or in books or whatever. It's about being able to portray that character and to make audiences understand or sympathise with either the character themselves or the people around the character. Which is why I think the A Word, with the BBC drama starring Christopher Eccleston, is a pretty good litmus test for that. You have this kid at the centre of the narrative on the autistic spectrum, and it's about the family coping with that. And it's not like, oh, the kid's got autism, what do we do? And we get 2 seasons worth of content out of that. The family have their own dramas and their own struggles, and sometimes they just happen to overlap with this kid. And I think that's a good way to play it. I think if there's one thing to be said about representation of people with autism in TV and film, or in film in particular, is that the film is either strictly about the character having autism and the way they see the world, like Rain Man or Forrest Gump, for example, or it's about, or the character with autism is strictly a supporting character who does not necessarily grow and change that much over the course of the film, like the Blue Ranger in the recent Saban's Power Rangers movie, or Holtzman in the Ghostbusters film, and Holtzman was my favourite character, and Kate McKinnon absolutely kills it, but I understand that that's a divisive topic and a divisive movie. But for you very rarely see a character as the actual lead who also happens to be autistic, and that is not the thrust of the story. I think in terms of representation, that is when it truly happens, when you have a character who just so happens to have this certain attribute, or what's the series called? It's the it stars Holiday Granger. It's a BBC crime thing, and the main detective character has a prosthetic leg. And you think, what's that got to do with autism? But it's still a representation of a demographic that is not often portrayed in TV and film. And it's not the centre of the story. They just happen to have a prosthetic leg, and sometimes it helps them, sometimes it holds them back. It's something that is frequently acknowledged, but it's not, oh, I'm a one-legged detective and this is my adventures. It's, oh, I'm a detective. Oh, and I happen to have a prosthetic leg. That's the sort of way representation, ideally in a completely ideal world, should be portrayed. But I think if you have a character who is maybe autistic, then you may end up having a Sherlock Holmes from the TV series Sherlock character, where he's this insensitive sociopath, and he's kind of his outlook on life is portrayed as a net negative thing, whereas autism is not necessarily that. And autism is a difficult thing to cover because it is on a spectrum. You have people who have mild autistic tendencies, and some people who it is basically a daily challenge, or it is a daily constant facet of their life. So it's difficult to portray something that is on a spectrum like that, but I think it can be done because media is vast, media is all-consuming. There's thousands of hours being pumped out every single day of like entertainment on hundreds and thousands of channels in all corners of the world. I don't think it's too unreasonable to ask that maybe one of those TV shows has an autistic character at the front, and it's not necessarily about their autism. I don't necessarily have a personal stake in this fight, but as someone who really wants to try and champion media and champion the power of storytelling, I understand that it can be important to see yourself or see see something that you don't necessarily personally relate to seen on screen. It helps you become a better person. It helps to educate and inform. And I think it needs to be done. So these are just the ramblings. It's why I couldn't really limit myself to a minute. But hopefully I've given you some material to work with. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. Or maybe I've just rambled on. But that is the whole point of the podcast. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble on the Film Brits podcast. Be sure to check me out as well, ramble on the Movie Mania podcast. Be sure you can subscribe to Bandit Incorporated's YouTube channel, and we do a live stream every week. I wasn't there last week because I was in Canada, but I'll try and be there again this week. I think we're talking about Deadpool 2. You can also follow me on Twitter at Trilbee Reviews. If you're listening to this on iTunes, please leave a review and rate, and I'd massively appreciate that. And also be sure to help to support the podcast on Patreon. I massively appreciate that, and I'll see you folks next time.